Is the American middle class disappearing? You finally landed that six-figure salary. On paper, you should be set. So why do you still have that nagging feeling of financial unease? If you're earning what's supposed to be a good income, but still feel like you're just treading water, you're not alone. And you're definitely not imagining it. According to the Federal Reserve, about a quarter of American adults report they are struggling financially, saying they are either just getting by or finding it difficult to get by. In this video, we're going to expose why the core pillars of the middle class life now feel completely out of reach for millions and what's really going on. And we're going to take a little break here. If you want to make sense of the world where the numbers don't seem to match reality, be sure to subscribe for more content that breaks it all down from STM, Global News and World Report. So the squeeze is real. For decades, the American dream was simple enough formula: get a good job, buy a house, raise a family, and retire comfortably. But that formula feels broken. According to the Pew Research Center, the share of American adults in the middle class has shrunk from 61% in 1971 to about 51% today. Now, it's important to know that this isn't just a slide into poverty. The share of Americans in the upper income tier has actually grown more than the share in the lower income tier. But this isn't just a story about numbers on a chart, it's about a fundamental shift in the lived experience of millions. Let's look at a hypothetical, but all too real couple, Sarah and Tom. Combined, they earned $120,000 a year, well above the national median. They should be the picture of success, yet they are renting an apartment because they can't afford a down payment. They're delaying kids because of childcare costs. And they're one major car repair away from their budget going completely off the rails. Their story is the story of the modern American middle class, a group that may still exist on paper, but whose life is increasingly defined by insecurity and high costs. The crumbling pillars. So, what happened? Why does a six-figure salary feel like it's just scraping by? The answer is that the very pillars of the middle class dream are crumbling. First, let's talk about housing. The cost of a home in the United States has dramatically outpaced what we earn. Some analysis show that since the 1980s, home prices have grown significantly faster than incomes. What was once the cornerstone of the middle class wealth has now become one of the biggest drivers of financial strain, locking millions out of the market. Next up is healthcare. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, costs for employer sponsored family health insurance have climbed steadily, with the premiums for family coverage rising about 6% in 2025 to nearly $27,000 per year. That's money that isn't going into your paycheck. In fact, research has shown that rising health insurance costs substantially hold back wage growth. For families like Sarah and Tom, this creates a constant low grade fear that one medical emergency could wipe out their savings. And finally, education and debt. The classic path to middle class life, a college degree, now comes with a massive price tag. Americans now owe a collective total of around 1.7 trillion in student loan debt. For millions, particularly those between 35 and 49, who hold one of the largest shares of this debt, the promise of higher earnings can feel completely offset by decades of repayment. It's no wonder that a record high of about 25% of 40-year-olds have never been married, with many surveys citing financial pressure as one of the several key reasons for delaying major life milestones. Playing a different game. This is not a budgeting failure. This is arithmetic. The math ain't mathin'. When the costs of housing, healthcare, and education dramatically outpace wage growth, what gives? For many, the only way to maintain a middle class lifestyle is to take on debt Some studies show that around 1 in 3 middle class households struggle to afford basic necessities. They aren't buying yachts, they're financing stability. So, what can you do? If the game feels rigged, the only answer is to play a different one. This isn't about giving up on financial security, it's about redefining it. The new American dream isn't about keeping up with the Joneses, it's about building a life that's resilient to economic shocks. That means a radical shift in focus from income to assets. It means prioritizing financial literacy, developing high income skills that aren't tied to a single employer, and aggressively paying down high interest debt to free up your cash flow. It's about understanding that in today's economy, true wealth isn't just what you earn, it's what you own and what you control. The story of disappearing middle class isn't a sudden collapse. It's a slow grinding squeeze on paper. Many Americans seem richer than ever, but in reality, they feel poorer because the security that money is supposed to buy has been steadily eroded. The core promise that if you work hard and play by the rules, you get ahead feels broken. The real crisis isn't just economic, it's crisis of belief in the system itself. But understanding the new rules of the game is the first step towards winning it. Welcome, everybody, to STM Global News and World Report. This is Yeshayahu, where we bring you the news and breaking news for the day. And we're going to turn this over to Rachel Israel, our correspondent. Rachel, take it away.
Hi, this is Rachel Israel with STM News and Global World Report. We have breaking news that will have a huge impact on the global scene in the very near future. Let's take a look at what's going on around the world. Tonight, we turn to a crisis hiding in plain sight.
You finally landed that six-figure salary. On paper, you should be set. So why do you still feel financially uneasy? If you earn what is supposed to be a good income but feel like you are treading water, you are not imagining it. According to the Federal Reserve, about a quarter of American adults say they are just getting by or finding it difficult to get by. Tonight, what is really going on with the American middle class? The pillars of a middle-class life are getting pricier: housing, childcare, healthcare, insurance, food, and debt. Home prices climbed, and mortgages stayed higher than the ultra-low era many remember. Add rising property taxes and insurance premiums, and the monthly nut swells further. Renters face the same squeeze. In many cities, 40 to 50% of income now goes to rent alone. Groceries and utilities that once fit the budget now require trade-offs. Childcare can rival a mortgage payment, reshaping household math. Incomes rose on paper, but after essentials, the leftover is often smaller than a decade ago. Debt fills the gap. Credit cards become emergency lifelines, and interest eats tomorrow before it arrives. Insurance helps, but deductibles, co-pays, and uncovered treatments can drain years of savings in months. One repair, one leak, one bill too big, and the margin for error vanishes. A good job isn't the shield it once was. Restructuring and automation raise the risk of sudden income loss. The new face of homelessness hides in plain sight. Working people cycling between motels, cars, and relatives' homes. Minimums get paid, savings get paused, and long-term plans fade into survival mode. Asset owners pull away as prices rise, those priced out fall further behind. When the middle class tightens belts, local businesses, housing markets, and future growth feel it. Resilience now requires more than income. Emergency reserves, manageable debt, adaptable skills. Watch the drivers: housing, healthcare, childcare, debt burdens, and job volatility. Is the American middle class disappearing, or just redefining itself under pressure?
Being middle class, I feel like you're really just in between a rock and a hard place.
So there are certain kinds of assumptions around being a middle class person that have sort of shattered.
And wages really in some ways are a reflection of of the productivity and skills of American workers.
4 in 10 Americans say that money affects them negatively and the state of their mental health.
The consumers that have a whole lot of debt really are struggling to survive.
The middle class was once a symbol of the American dream. But the American middle class today paints quite a different picture.
Being middle class, I feel like you're really just in between a rock and a hard place. You know, you're in a spot where everyone's like, hey, you're doing better than, low class. You're doing great. You should be fine. And you're underneath the people who are actually doing fine.
It was at least a secure category. Your kids would go to a school that you felt at least okay about. You probably own a car or two, and you'd own your own home, and you could pay for your kids' college educations. So there were certain kinds of assumptions around being a middle class person that have sort of shattered.
A survey in 2018 found that a third of middle-income adults don't have $400 to cover an unexpected expense.
In polls, when people are asked about being middle class, they frequently are less likely to say so, and more people now urge the pollsters to suggest that they're working class. So I think that many people who maybe in prior years would have thought of themselves as middle class now no longer think of themselves that way.
So when we think about economic status, we think about it as some static, state of the world, that you are either poor or not poor, you're middle class or you're not. But in fact, the reality is that many middle class families will experience one or a few years in poverty. In fact, most American families will have years where they'll be poor or near poor. That precarity, that uncertainty, that is now a feature of the middle class experience for most U.S. families.
So, what exactly happened to the American middle class? A study by the Pew Research Center discovered that the middle class, which was once comprised of the majority of Americans, has steadily shrunk since the 1970s. About 61% of American adults were considered middle class in 1971, compared to just 51% in 2019. However, the issue still remains widely debated.
When people think about the state of the middle class and whether or not it's shrinking, it really is a difficult question. And I think the reason why is that as a nation, we've not actually established a formal definition of middle class.
I was at a seminar recently where somebody literally said, there is no middle class anymore. The middle class is gone. And I thought, oh dear, that's political rhetoric. And I understand that it's a sort of a stand-in for saying that folks in the middle are hurting. But it's just really not accurate. We looked at the size of the middle class in these 16 rich countries in 1985 and again in 2016. And one of the things that surprised me was the size of the middle class in the United States did not change. It was about 59% in 1985, and it was 59% in 2016.
Experts instead prefer the term squeezed to describe what's happening to the middle class today.
Even if the middle class hasn't statistically shrunk, I do think that the middle class faces more in the way of pressures to maintain or even build upon their position.
What it takes to actually live a middle class life, to have quality of life in many American cities is not what it once was. They're not necessarily able to pay their rent easily. They can't own a property. If they're in their 30s, they may not feel comfortable having kids because they'll realize that having a child would be too expensive. And forget about medical care. If you have one thing happens to you physically, often people don't have good enough medical care. They don't have any insurance. This all goes into making somebody part of the squeezed middle class.
As the middle class lifestyle grows more expensive and uncertain, it's also moving farther beyond the reach of younger generations. In 2019, just 60% of millennials were part of middle-income households in their 20s, compared with almost 70% of baby boomers. Meet Chantel Jacob. Chantel lives in suburban Texas with her husband and one child. And while a household income of just over $100,000 should put her family in the middle income tier, she says that her family is still struggling toward financial stability.
Sounds great, 6 figures, but once we got married, the taxes that come out of my check, before I even get any money, before all of my benefits, $500 come out of my check automatically. And then you add in insurance, life insurance for my spouse, myself, and my son. And I also have money going aside for my son's college fund. It's not a lot because I can't do that much, but I want to have something for him. You know, my check that starts off at about $3,000 goes down to $2,200 before I even get to touch it. Our rent's about $1,700. Electricity is about $150. Phone bill's about $280. Internet $60. We both have vehicles. Those are about $800. Insurance on those vehicles is about $400. On food, $400 to $500 a month, but that's increasing. We budget down to the dollar, and sometimes it's very disheartening to work all week and have people tell you like, oh, you're so lucky, you have a great job, and then you're like, I don't know about that.
There are several reasons why the middle class is feeling squeezed. The first reason is stagnated income. Between 1970 and 2018, the middle class share of aggregate income fell by 19% in the US. In comparison, the share of aggregate income for upper income households saw a rise of 19%. Another study by the Brookings Institute found that income in the middle class has grown half as fast compared to both the bottom 20% and the top 20% of income tiers once taxes and transfers were taken into account.
Can I prove the American middle class is disappearing, or am I completely wrong? The American middle class, a symbol of prosperity, stability, and the American dream. But in recent years, there's been a growing concern that it's vanishing before our eyes. Is the American middle class truly disappearing? To explore this question, we'll have to dig into the factors contributing to this perception. The term middle class is often used, but not always clearly defined. Generally, it's associated with a certain level of income, education, and occupation. In the U.S., it's often considered households with incomes between 67% and 200% of the median income. However, this definition can vary, and it's not always easy to pinpoint exactly who belongs to the middle class. One way to look at it is through the lens of income. According to data from the Pew Research Center, in 2020, middle-class households earned between about $40,000 and $120,000. But what's happening to these households? Are they moving up or down the economic ladder? Evidence suggests that the middle class has been shrinking over the past few decades. A 2020 report by the Brookings Institution found that the share of middle-class households in the U.S. decreased from 56.5% in 1979 to 45.1% in 2019. This trend is concerning, as a strong middle class is often seen as a backbone of a healthy economy. So, what's driving this shift? Income inequality is a major factor. The rich are getting richer, while the poor and middle class are struggling to keep up. Automation and globalization have also changed the job market, leading to a decline in well-paying manufacturing jobs and a rise in lower-paying service work. The rising costs of living, including housing, healthcare, and education, have also put pressure on middle-class households. Many are finding it harder to afford basic necessities, let alone save for the future. These economic factors have social and political implications. As the middle class shrinks, social mobility decreases, and the gap between the haves and have-nots grows. The American dream, which has long been associated with the middle class, seems to be slipping away for many. A stark comparison of middle-class life across different decades highlights the severity of the situation. Consider this: in the 1960s, a typical middle-class family could afford a house, a car, and a vacation. Today, many middle-class families struggle to afford these same things. The data is clear: the median income for a middle-class household has barely increased over the past few decades, while the costs of living have skyrocketed. For example, in 1960, the median price of a new home was around $11,900. Today, it's over $270,000. The implications are clear: the middle class is under pressure, and it's getting harder to make ends meet. In conclusion, the American middle class is facing significant challenges. While it's not disappearing overnight, the trend is clear: it's shrinking, and it's getting harder for households to move up the economic ladder. The issue is complex, with multiple factors at play. But one thing is certain: the fate of the American middle class will have far-reaching implications for the entire economy and society. So, what do you think? Have you noticed changes in your own life or in your community? Share your experiences and opinions in the comments below. If you're interested in more videos about economic and social trends, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell.
Well, that's the news for tonight. Thank you so much for continually supporting our content. If you did enjoy this video, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, and share this with your friends and family. I'm sure they would find it interesting as well. We're very excited to continue this journey with you. We thank you all for bringing certain stories to our attention, and for continually keeping us updated with certain events around the world.
Coloring Book for Kids, Volume 2. Available August 15, 2025 on Amazon. The Bible Lions Coloring Book for Children. Color 30 fun designs of inspirational verses and Christian artwork. A beautiful children's coloring book designed to fill your child's mind with the positive words of God's love. The Bible Lions Coloring Book for Kids was designed to be a fun, yet effective way to help children calm their tension. Hand-lettered quotes and adorable hand-designed illustrations will inspire your child as they reflect on God's promises.